Well, good afternoon. My name is Andrew Robinson. I am going to be presenting a persuasive speech arguing against the captivity of orca. But before I begin, I want to explain who I am and why I'm here. So I'm a recent high school graduate from Westminster Academy, a small classical school in Memphis, Tennessee. And a part of our liberal arts education includes taking rhetoric as a class and the presentation of a senior thesis. So for my senior thesis, I chose the topic of orcas in captivity. And there's nothing really groundbreaking about my presentation. In fact, to most of you all in this room, you all know this information. But the reason why I'm here to present a shortened version of my thesis is just to show that everyone has the power to make a difference, and that everyone needs to use their voice to make a difference to help end this inhumane situation that's going on. But before I begin, I have to thank a few amazing people that helped get me here. I would like to thank my amazing rhetoric teacher, Ms. Shonick, who taught me everything I know about public speaking, and who's just made an enormous impact on my life. I would like to thank, of course, Dr. Marino for providing me this amazing opportunity and figuring out the crazy logistics of getting all the way from Memphis, Tennessee to the San Juan Islands. So without further ado, the case against captivity. SeaWorld, the aquatic theme park, is known for their marine mammal shows. The most iconic of these marine mammals being the Orocynus orca, or killer whale. Most people go to SeaWorld and they think of these orcas in captivity as a wondrous opportunity to get to see these whales up close and personal. Most assume that these whales are not only healthy, but better off than they would be if they were in the wild. When people go to a SeaWorld show and see the way both whale and trainer non-verbally communicate and work in elegant synchronicity with graceful artistry, it's astounding. Blindly, the audience is led to believe that what they're seeing is a true and natural representation of these whales. And while on the surface it may seem that SeaWorld's captivity of orca is not only beneficial, but harmless, when one dives deeper beneath the surface, a more accurate and clear representation of SeaWorld becomes visible. Now, before we can address the issue of captivity of orca, we must first understand the animals that it involves. Orocynus orca are some of the most complex animals in our oceans today. These whales live the equivalent of human lifespans. These whales are incredibly intelligent with very complex social structures. They live in family groups called pods where the females are the most dominant. And these pods have different sets of behaviors, different social norms, different vocalizations. These whales essentially have different cultures. However, the most interesting thing about an orca is its brain. Dr. Lori Marino, a neuroscientist and expert in animal behavior and intelligence, took an MRI of an orca brain. What she found was shocking. These whales have a part of the brain that humans do not have. A part of their brain has extended from their limbic system. This is the system that processes emotions. Dr. Marino states that the safest inference is that these whales have incredibly elaborate and complex emotional lives. They have an extreme awareness of themselves as well as those around them. Their sense of self and social bonding is beyond a human level. Every aspect of these animals' lives is incredibly social. Now, having addressed a little background on these whales, we can now fully address the question of should SeaWorld be allowed to hold these whales in captivity? Because the environment is harmful to the health of these whales, because the environment causes these whales to be hyper-aggressive, and because the environment ultimately leads to these whales' death, SeaWorld should release their whales to a seaside sanctuary. You see, this environment poses multiple problems to a whale's health, both mentally and physically. SeaWorld ignores the complex family structure of whales. One example of this is the story of Kasaka and Takara. Kasaka and Takara, mother and calf, lived at SeaWorld San Diego until Takara was around 12 years old. It was at this time that SeaWorld decided to move Takara to SeaWorld Orlando. Takara was stretchered out of the pool where her mother was and placed on a truck. Kasaka began to make vocalizations calling for her daughter. However, even after Takara had left the park and was on the way to the airport, Kasaka continued to make vocalizations. However, these vocalizations were different. When SeaWorld brought in a research analyst to look at these vocals, the analyst determined that these were long-range vocals. These vocalizations were unheard of. Kasaka was trying something that had never been heard before, desperately trying to find her daughter. There's not a way to look at this which does not scream absolutely horrific. The tanks at SeaWorld also pose multiple problems for these whales. You see, these whales in the wild swim up to 100 miles every day. However, in captivity, the largest tank at SeaWorld is only 7/100ths of a mile long. In the wild, these whales dive up to 525 feet. However, in captivity, the largest tank at SeaWorld is only 35 feet deep. These tanks prevent exercise and cause immense stress. And because of this, these whales exhibit stereotypic behaviors, such as gnawing on the tanks. And because they exhibit this stereotypic behavior, these whales have to be taken out of the tanks weekly to have their teeth drilled and fleshed without the use of anesthesia. This environment that SeaWorld has created for these whales is an instant detriment to the overall health and well-being of an orca. SeaWorld should release their whales to a seaside sanctuary, not only because the environment is injurious to the health of an orca, but because it causes them to be hyper-aggressive as well. Hyper-aggression between whales is incredibly dangerous and oftentimes is fatal. And as I've stated before, the females are the most dominant, and in the wild, males are typically kept on the outside of the pod. However, this is not possible in captivity. The tanks are too small. So when SeaWorld puts a large male whale like Tilikum in an incredibly small tank with two agile females, they're only asking for trouble. Tilikum was constantly beat up, constantly bullied, and constantly raked. And raking to an extent is not a problem. After all, raking occurs naturally in the wild. However, raking to the constant degree that occurs at SeaWorld is practically unheard of in a natural environment. This aggression that's seen between whales is also seen towards trainers. There are countless stories of this aggression towards trainers, gruesome and horrifying stories. However, there is yet to be more than one documented attack of a killer whale on a human in the wild today. Furthermore, these orcas need to be released because the environment at SeaWorld leads to their premature deaths. You see, these whales are in pain. And these whales are suffering because they're held in a harmful, captive environment at SeaWorld. By cause of captivity, these whales have developed incredibly large stomach ulcers and compromised immune systems. 100% of all captive male killer whales have a collapsed dorsal fin. Less than 3% of orcas in the wild have this problem. These whales live the equivalent of human lifespans in the wild, and it's been documented that they can live to be over 100 years old. However, on average, an orca at SeaWorld only lives to be 13 years old. The mortality rate of an orca in captivity is 2.5 times greater than that of an orca in the wild. Without intervention, these whales will die. However, what's the solution? How do we fix this problem? A seaside sanctuary. 70 to 100 acres of open ocean to allow these whales the most freedom that can be afforded. You see, these whales have been crippled by captivity, stunted and held back in their emotional and physical development. And because these whales don't have the skills necessary to survive on their own in the wild, human intervention is a necessity. And for these reasons, SeaWorld should release their whales to a seaside sanctuary. However, some may disagree with me. Some say that orcas are no different from any other zoo animal, and that they're therefore suitable for captivity. However, I would argue that these whales are extraordinarily different. Just the fact alone that they have a part of the brain that we do not have proves this. Others raise the objection that limited space is not a valid argument against captivity, because no animal in captivity has as much space as it does in the wild. And while that is true, that no animal in captivity has as much space as it does in its natural environment, there is a difference between space available and space needed to live. An orca requires far more space to actually live than most captive animals. These whales swim 100 miles every day. To swim the equivalent of that in the largest tank at SeaWorld would take 1,500 laps. It's often argued that having these whales in captivity provides a valuable educational experience, and that therefore this captivity is justified. However, seeing an orca in the most unnatural environment, exhibiting the most unnatural behaviors, is only an education on how crippling captivity is to these whales. Seeing an orca floating lifeless with a collapsed dorsal fin in a concrete tank alone, in comparison to seeing an orca swimming with its pod with a straight dorsal fin off the coast of the San Juan Islands is absolutely sobering. And while there is a magnificence and a wonder of being able to see an orca so easily as you can in captivity, this desire to see an orca in captivity is selfish. You see, an orca cannot thrive, let alone even survive in a captive environment. So this educational experience is hardly educational, and the price of captivity far outweighs these educational benefits. So in conclusion, because the environment of captivity is harmful to the health of an orca, because the environment causes these whales to be hyper-aggressive, and because it ultimately leads to their deaths, SeaWorld must release their whales to a seaside sanctuary. The whales are suffering. 50 years of holding these whales in captivity is enough. The murky waters surrounding the captivity of orca have become clear. Oricynus orca are not suited for captivity. Keeping these whales in concrete tanks is not only unethical, but it's inhumane. And as a society, we cannot continue to allow these whales to sit in concrete tanks and die. These whales are to a point where they cannot be released without some sort of human oversight and care. The Whale Sanctuary Project offers a solution to this problem. A seaside sanctuary. A place where these whales who have been handicapped and abused by the SeaWorld industry can have a place to live out their lives as close to free as their conditions permit. Man must take action to free these whales from their cloudy, chlorinated, and captive environment. We can end this inhumane situation by supporting organizations like the Whale Sanctuary Project and boycotting SeaWorld until they agree to the release of these magnificent creatures. The whales are bored, the whales are tired, and most importantly, these whales are dying. It's time to take a step back from our selfish desires and release these whales to a seaside sanctuary. Thank you.